So Deborah's going to move us into kind of the piece that we've really looked at a lot is Education by Poetry by Robert Frost, and she's going to take us through that.
Okay, so just as all morning you've been talking about how narrative is a human construct that that is a way of organizing ideas, and it tells a story, but it also leaves out other stories. It relies heavily on what we know, what we understand, and it triggers those things, like the story about the farmer. It triggers nostalgia. It triggers our familiarity with a particular way of seeing the world. Robert Frost, in a speech called Education by Poetry, said that really all of us should be studying poetry because it puts us in touch with metaphor and the type of thinking that metaphor reveals. And he basically says we are not safe unless we become observant of the metaphors that we use and that other people use on us. And so I thought this was really interesting and talked to Paula about it, about using poetry as a quick way to get into metaphor. One, it's short, and two, it relies on metaphor so much. Now, what Frost is really talking about in this speech is what we might call schema theory or analogous or analogous thinking. And metaphor means to carry meaning over from one thing to another. So you carry it over from the known to the less well known. And he says we have to be very careful in how we employ metaphors. Very careful. And lo and behold, somebody else is doing the same thinking, and Frost was able to do it in one 20-minute speech. And this is a book I found on the bookshelf at Rediscovered Books called Surfaces and Essences, Analogy as the Fuel and Fire of Thinking. And it talks about how we learn everything by fitting it into our schema, using analogies, and metaphors, similes, symbols are all one way that we then express that. And the problem is, though, that our metaphors die. And you all know about dead metaphors, I think. I had the best experience learning what a dead metaphor is when I took French in college. I was a little late. And we were learning the French word for the word skyscraper. And the French teacher said, oh, it's gratte-ciel, scratches the sky. And I said, oh, that's funny, it scratches the sky. We use the word skyscraper. Oh, wait a minute, it's the same thing. And so we become inured to certain things, and we lose sight of the fact that it really literally once meant to scratch the sky, because we had a new thing that we were trying to describe, a really, really tall building that rose into the sky, and whoever got to name it named it a skyscraper. But it's dead to us. The metaphor of it is dead to us. And then think about our culture in general. If you think of one of the analogies or the metaphors that we use in Western civilization for years, is the analogy or the metaphor. We're kind of using them interchangeably here, although rhetoricians would really hate us for that. The fallen man. Think of how many assumptions are embedded in that schema, the fallen man. And then think of a different way of looking at the world, the yin and the yang of Eastern philosophy. That's a very different way of framing our world through a metaphor or a symbol. And so Frost had this to say: I do not think anybody ever knows the discrete use of metaphor, his own or other people's, unless he has been properly educated in poetry. So he makes the case in this 20-minute speech that teaching children to recognize the metaphors they use and the worldviews that they represent is fundamental to being a questioning, thinking person. So we have excerpted, this is a strategy that you can use in your classroom when you have a really long, dense, difficult text. Extract out a number of quotations, write them down, and then give students a space wherein they can respond to them. So we've taken basically 5 pages and condensed them down into a couple of pages worth of quotations and space for you to write. So read through those and pick one that you would like to respond to, and just go ahead and write your thoughts based on what you've heard so far about what the text is about and what he says there. Just scan through them and write on one of them. Of course, with your students, you'd have them write on all of them. So you'll notice that we have just experimented with summarizing, taking someone else's words and putting them into our own words, paraphrase, summarize. There are many ways you could use this technique. You could have students read all of them and comment on all of them, or you could divide and conquer. You could also employ a jigsaw with this, where you'd have students teaching their observation, their paraphrase. You could get students to argue about different paraphrases and whether or not they got the gist of it correctly. And then, of course, you can talk about the whole article in the whole context. So what we would like for you to do now, and you can use the back of this handout, is another strategy called 3-2-1. And so we would like you to compose 3 takeaways from this activity, either the activity, the various strategies that we had you try, or the article itself, or the quotations, I should say, from the article. So you can either comment on the content or the procedures, 2 questions that you might have, and then 1 frustration. Because we have to give students a space to express their frustration. We have to make it safe for them to critique our presentation of ideas.